Welcome to the Art of Growth, where we use the enneagram and the best tools we can find to help individuals and teams experience self-knowledge, self-awareness, and transformational habits. We recently had a webinar, and we were asking people what it was like to be on the best team they'd ever been on, work-wise or otherwise. And there was a lot of learnings that came out of that, and we wanted to share a bit about what each type says they need on a team, what makes them feel like they are able to function at their best. Now, as we were talking about this, we started realizing that a lot of times words that we all use and words that are very important to how we communicate in a personal life as well as a business life can be interpreted or understood or perceived different ways through the different enneagram types. And so we want to elaborate on that and actually look at it so that we actually know what each other is meaning when they use words that are important to them. And so we are going to host another webinar for free on Tuesday, April 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can sign up now at www.theartofgrowth.org, and there'll be a link on the front page for an Eventbrite so that you can join us for that webinar. We've really enjoyed being able to host these free webinars for you throughout COVID-19, and I'm not sure how many more we'll be able to do like this, but for now, we want to invite you to come and join us and learn with us. So sign up for that on our website. You can also take our beta version of our free Enneagram online test on the front page of our website as well. That's www.theartofgrowth.org. That is also the place to contact us if you are interested in coaching or consulting for yourself as a group or as a business. We know that for many, going from a podcast to stepping into coaching can feel like a big step. So if it's something you're interested in but you're not sure about, you can go to our website and sign up to do a discovery call, which is like a 15-minute call with one of us to talk about what coaching would look like for you and what might be particular to your situation. If you're interested in having our team coach your team in a business context, you can do a discovery call with all three of us, actually, with Joel, Suzanne, and Jim Zartman, myself. And so contact us to set up a discovery call. So due to this COVID-19, we are not able to get all in the same room and record together, but we still wanted to be able to do some content that would be helpful to people out there. So without further ado, we will get to this week's episode of us all recording in different locations about what each type needs when they're working on a team.
So we had a really great discussion with a group of people in a highly engaged webinar last week. And it was really remarkable for me to think about teams through a whole new lens. And that is the lens of the core motivations for the Enneagram. Guys, how was that webinar for you? What was it like on your end?
Amazing for me, I think. I really enjoyed listening to the feedback. I was really deeply appreciative of you, Suzanne, for always bringing it back to, hey, what are people thinking? Because the feedback was gold. And it just brought a sense of community too. That was the other thing I noticed was just a feeling of connection and community and picking up on probably a need that not only I have, but maybe others have too, which is to connect even more so during this season. So that was huge for me. And I think also the conversation that ensued between the three of us as we were sort of listening to what others were saying as well became really rich and meaningful.
Yeah, for sure. Jim, how about you on your end?
Yeah, I think we discovered some magic sauce in this whole webinar thing that has happened as a result of this COVID-19. And it was neat because I think there was some of the promptings and questions really helped people bring the answers out for themselves in a lot of ways. That was really cool to hear. I think we're going to be onto something in the future with some webinars because the interaction was very, very good, very, very healthy, and people are starting to reveal the inner wisdom, reveal the wisdom that is in them as we delve into these topics, and that's really cool.
Yeah, I was so impressed by not only the number of people who showed up, but how engaged they were and how much they really did want to talk about, in this case, teams. And for me, it's a
Mm.
topic I could talk about all the time, but I recognize it may not be a favorite topic for everyone. But there was something about people's desire to understand, how do we work together now that we need to work apart? And how do we carry forward some of that to when we are able to come back together? I don't even know when or how it will happen, but we do know that this time period, this season, will come to an end. And so I just noticed that people were curious about relating to one another when it's got to be done virtually. So we talked about two topics came up that we got to go a little deeper on. And for me, it was exhilarating because I've talked about these topics before, but I had not been able to get the feedback that we got through the lens of the core motivations. So I'll share what the topics were, and then we can go a little bit more specific into the conversations there.
Sounds great.
So when I work with teams, my going in approach is that the team is an entity of itself, and it's also made up of parts, obviously. And so a team that can come together and really work well together is optimized when the individuals know about themselves and know a little bit more about the people that they're working with. And so in this conversation, we got to break down the parts a little bit more when it came to talking about teams that work well together. So we started by asking the question of, hey, think about a time when you've been on the best team, and what was that experience like for you? For me, the responses that came back were really insightful because people also were willing to share their how they identified from an enneagram standpoint. And so now it was a chance to see that people define best team, because it's obviously very subjective. They define best team in very different ways, but yet easily understood if you knew their enneagram core motivation. So where they were coming from, the lens that was helping them judge whether the experience was a great experience or not.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things that you just said that jump out at me because what was really cool is people always want to know when they're working with their employees or even with their boss, they want to know, how do I function the best in this environment, and what is the best kind of environment for me? And when you phrased it in the way you did, like what's the best team you've ever been on, and what are the aspects of that team? What you hear is people relating information of what it was like to be on a team that deeply resonated with who they naturally are as a person from their Enneagram type. And we have these different core motivations in the 9 types, and how when people spoke to being on a team, it was so clear that the team was meeting that core need. It really made my brain go crazy and starting to think about like what teams could look like if they had this capacity to really make these core motivations available in that work setting.
Absolutely, because what struck me is that a couple of people could be talking about the same team experience. They weren't in this case because people came from different backgrounds. But imagine asking that question of the same team. They're watching the same movie, quote unquote, and yet based on your core motivations, you're going to pull out from that movie the parts of it that resonate most with you. And I found that really fascinating in that concept of being able to talk about how can you create the best experience for individuals when the individuals have different definitions of what best looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you mentioned the movie analogy, I immediately thought of a picture to myself. I could see myself in, with friends, family. Sometimes we'll do that. We'll all go out and see the same movie. And there'll be parts where I'll look over and I'll see someone tearing up. And I will look back at the scene and think, what about that is moving them? Because it's not having the same impact on me. And then I will find something ridiculously funny and then burst out in laughter and realize no one else is laughing. Like it's not the same. It doesn't have the same impact, or just maybe not laughing as loudly. It's not as funny to them as it is to me. And then of course there are those scenes that it seems like it impacts all of us similarly. but yet for various reasons, it'll all be still very, very personal. And so there's that. There's the movie that is impactful. There's here's what we're offering as a company, not only to our own customers, but also to we want our employees to love this and to love the work environment. And there's also that employees actually want to serve and do something significant for the company itself. And I think that also came out in our conversation when we talked about teams. Is in what ways do you want as an individual how do you feel most valuable? When do you feel most valuable? So even though we didn't directly ask that question, that came up. And I think that's also extremely important to think about is how do you bring out the best? And how does each person contribute? And in what ways are they made to feel like their contribution is meaningful and important to the company?
Absolutely. Yeah. This real human desire to be a part of something bigger than yourself. That definitely came through. Well, let's break it down a bit. So I'll talk from the core motivation from the heart, and then I'll turn it over to you guys to talk about the other two. When we were discussing as a group on the webinar about the best team experience from people who have a heart center, there were words like together, and all working with the same goal in mind. People having clear boundaries and an opportunity to do their best work. I've also had times where I'm thinking about the best team as a heart is when you're really connected to the goal and to the people that you're working with. And so communication tends to be really high and really meaningful. Meaningful is definitely a word that I would bring, that there's meaning to the work that we're doing, and that we're bringing people along and people's emotions are being considered, so that we can get the best out of each person as they work together to get the best out of the team.
Yeah, there's something about heart-centered people that they are not as compartmentalized as someone who might be just action-focused or something, because there is the awareness of the goal, but there's also the simultaneous awareness that we're doing it together, and those don't get sort of usurped by each other as frequently as they do for some others. There really is a great awareness of both the task at hand and the people doing the task and interacting together and the person that the task is going to ultimately serve.
That really resonates with me as a heart-centered one.
Yeah, you mentioned communication. I thought that's interesting because I think every type would say, well, communication is important, and oftentimes find themselves feeling that they've miscommunicated or that there's someone miscommunicated something to them. But what's unique about the Heart Center, I think, is that there's something about the communication that is more than just communication of facts and information. There's something more to that. I wonder if you could say something about that, Suzanne, as a type 2, and then, kind of thinking through what does communication mean? What does it look like? What does it look like to you? What does it mean to you?
That's a great reflection for me. I think when I think about communication, you're right that content matters. So what are the facts and the information that needs to get communicated? But it's also the packaging of that content. People say that communication is, some percent of it is what you're saying, but also another large percent is how you're saying it. So for me, the communication is it in a way that I can receive it? And can I feel good about the exchange of information? So there's definitely a sense of feeling in that, and if I can understand and trust that what I see is what I get, and I don't have to worry about did somebody mean something different than what I took from that. That's exhausting for me as a 2, is trying to figure out if there's a meaning behind it. And so good communication for me is one where it's authentic and I can relate to the person and the information is useful and easy for me to take in.
It's funny because we had, the three of us had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and there was some tension in the space that we're all three of us were inhabiting, and I thought,
which I always enjoy, and I deeply enjoy, and I deeply love as a type 8.
Yeah, me not so much, and but it's funny because that was a question you asked. all three of us, well, the two of us, but you were sort of asking, like, all three of us at the same time, like, is there
Yeah.
something I'm missing here? Am I the problem? Or what's going on here? We're trying to figure out not just because in terms of the content or the answers to the questions you were asking, they were pretty direct, pretty straightforward. Coming from an 8 and coming from a 7, it's pretty much like, well, no, we're good. Let's get started. Sure. Let's just do this. But you're picking up on an energy, on a vibe that was not quite right. And that's classic of sort of, heart types, particularly 2s and probably 4s. And, but 3s would also pick up on that. And something's off. Something's not quite right here. And that mattered as much to you as it did whatever it is that we were about to do.
Yeah. Well, and in some cases, asking a question like that can be insightful. And in other cases, it can be draining on everyone else. Like, yes, we're fine. Just move on. So I can imagine.
Very true.
I can imagine how I'm experienced or by others is in some cases asking that type of question unlocks some really valuable conversation. And in other times, it probably seems like it slows down progress.
I've seen it do both, but sometimes the slowdown has been necessary in order to not have later complications, later resentments, later things come up that we didn't deal with now that come out on the next project.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll continue to have interesting dynamics among us, and we can work through it.
Yeah,
so.
and I'll always probably enjoy that more than both of you, and it'll be great.
Well, you did navigate us through it very well, Jim. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a comfortable space, and I think we'll get to that later. But one thing, as far as the heart motivation, we were just talking a little bit about the 2, but it was interesting to me how different the 3 response was from the 2 as far as what it was like to be on a great team for them.
Yeah, there was more independence that I noted. Give clarity in the sandbox I'm allowed to play in, but then leave me alone as I play in it. It's the sense I got.
Well, this is the thing with the 3, 7, and 8. For those who don't know, the type 7 and type 8 and type 3 are all considered more assertive, perhaps even felt by others as more aggressive, even if the 3 or the 7 and even some 8s would not experience themselves as aggressive or assertive necessarily, but others do. So everyone else experiences the 3, those 3 types that way. So in the heart triad, the 3 is considerably more assertive and aggressive. And it was interesting, the remark of loving a long leash, like, here's the goals, here's the clarity of what we're trying to achieve, but give me a long leash. Let me run, let me play, let me do my thing. And that brings the best out of the 3.
Yeah. And how about 4s? I'm not as aware of how a 4 views teams. So curious if any insights there we could bring up.
The type 4 does need, and a heart-centered person needs to also know how their impact, their work, is affecting other people. What is the back and forth here? As I work, is this helpful? Is this useful? Do you appreciate me? Do you appreciate what I'm doing? So that approval, that feedback is very, very important for the type 4. Even if the type 4 doesn't show that need, and not all type 4s will, and it's not flattery. It has to be genuine, and it has to be expressed this way. So when the 4 feels like that is happening, it's easier for them to engage in teamwork. If that stops happening, then the 4 can become very individualistic, sort of pull back, pull away. And so when you see that happening on a team, there's a good chance that the 4 is feeling, a lack of approval, a lack of appreciation, feeling unseen as they are working towards whatever goal or objective they were given. So I think that's an important indication if you're observing what's happening with a 4. And
Yeah, and I think it's core to understanding all of the heart triads that there is this question that is going off inside of them, which is, how do you see me? And with the 2, you'll get a little more of that feedback. And with the 3, you might get a little more of the spin of them just trying to adjust until you do see them favorably. But with the 4, you're not going to see it as clearly. First, a lot of them, they will give you that feedback. They'll give you that appreciation of you giving them good feedback. But some of them won't, because they do have this thing where they want to pull away from that sometimes. And so you may not always notice it with the 4s you work with, but they are still going to feel it differently when you pour out that kind of appreciation, that validation of their skills. They may not be as accepting of it all the time, or they may even be critiquing their praise they're given, but there's still a desire for it. And there's still a desire to be seen, and to be seen as unique, and to be seen as valuable in that space, because they have a deep desire to want to make a beautiful contribution that makes everyone more able to be themselves. And sometimes 4s are amazing in a team environment as far as giving permission to push new boundaries. And sometimes they need that in a work environment to be set free to do that very thing.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you. So how about one of you guys talk about the other core motivations?
Yeah, Joel, take us through the head types.
Yeah. So 5s, one of the important factors for 5s is respect of ideas, respect of what is being communicated by others. So listen and respect the ideas and work of each other. And that is very, very, very important for a 5, to dismiss someone's thoughts and ideas and contribution is something 5s dislike strongly. And so for a head type, it starts in the headspace. This is where their greatest value, their greatest contribution is from the headspace. And so when they put their hard work into something, it's usually around their thoughts, their perspectives, their research. And so if you have a 5 that's done a lot of work in research on a particular project, completes that work, that research, and then gives it. This is in response to having been asked, could you do some research on this? Could you find out what the best solution or the best possible series of solutions could be for this objective, this goal that we have? So the 5 goes to work. 5 goes and does all the research and then presents it. And if that is dismissed, if that is, oh yeah, we decided, sorry, we forgot to tell you, we decided to go in a different direction. That is one of the most painful experiences for a 5 because of how much they value their thoughts, their research, and so to respect what a 5 has put together is to actually read it, respect it, take it in, So those things matter a lot for a 5.
One of the things we heard during the webinar was that everyone listened and respected the ideas and work of each other. It was like listen and respect. And what are you listening and respecting? The ideas and the work.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I love that.
So type 6.
Yeah, type 6. One of the comments was, I love the support working toward a common end impact at the end of the day. So knowing what the impact or seeing the impact at the end of the day. I love the support. So key word there for 6s is support. Not all 6 will resonate with support being, I like the support, I seek out the support of other people. But there's a sense of needing support that emerges from the world, from outside of themselves. And so for a 6, they oftentimes seek the collaboration, like who else is involved in this. And even the most individual type 6 will still seek out others being in support or having the support of an authority figure or having the support of ideas, concepts. This is the sort of rule. This is the sort of policy that we all follow together. And so what you're going to find is 6s will do their best when they know that there's a team, a loyal team around them and authority figure who has their back. And also that their eyes and their attention tend to go towards the underdog as well, making sure that everybody is involved, everybody together is being protected and supported. And there's a sort of like big goal or, objective. We're all working together towards this common end. And we get there and we win together. We rise together. There's a very Six kind of way of thinking. We all rise together. And that's when they feel the best. And then, knowing the impact that they had at the end of the day, this was good for the team. This was good for the company. Everybody felt better and felt involved and felt appreciated. Those things matter hugely to a Six. And again, this is from the contribution of the head center. So it's like, I want to know that my concerns, my worries, my views were taken seriously. Like if they're not taken seriously for a Six, it's very demoralizing because their concern is about where the danger might be, where the problems might be, where things could go real bad. And so their attention will go there. And if we don't really take that seriously, they don't feel supported. They don't feel heard. So hear their thoughts, hear their concerns. And it won't always be about them. It'll be about other people as well. And because again, very team sort of mindset.
Yeah. And there's a checking in that is really good, which is sometimes difficult for some to be on the receiving end because it feels like there might be like they're so negative. You're bringing up all these concerns, but no, they're wanting just an awareness of it. They're like, I'm seeing this. Are you seeing this? They say, I want the check-in. I want to know where people are. I want to know what their concerns are. Because I think one of the comments we got was that this Six said that their stress reservoir was full. And I think it's good to be aware of it's not just something to fix. And we're not trying to fix it when we hear it, but they want it to be heard. There may need to be some time limits on it, so there isn't just sort of an endless spinning of it. But wanting to hear them out, I think, is a really good thing.
And that makes sense. And it's curious. I think some people consider that they might be seen as a nag in some cases if they're constantly checking in on, especially on things that could go wrong, might go wrong. So this person was really aware that could be how they're received. So I'm curious if because of the way that Sixes can help uncover the potential concerns, if that is something that's common to them from an experience standpoint.
This gets into more kind of deeper into the enneagram, but it depends upon their instinctual drives. And depending on the instinctual drive, and that's another layer to the enneagram, which is self-preservational instinct or a social instinct or a more of a one-on-one, sometimes called sexual instinct, which is really about that, that sort of connection with other people. It depends upon your instinctual drive. If you have a strong, self-preservational drive, you may not be as checking in all the time with other people. It'll be more internal, but that spinning, that sort of questioning and concern will always be there. Some are more expressive of it, and that's when they can feel like a nag to other people. It's more of an external processing, and that is sometimes what they need is to find a way to get that out. And once it gets out of them, so all Sixes find, by the way, as far as I know, most Sixes, at least I've talked to, find it very helpful to get their thoughts out. Even even the introverted, quieter ones that won't express it out loud, by journaling, writing it down, getting it out on paper can be very, very helpful for them, because then it just sort of gets it out from inside of themselves and puts it outside, and they can see it more objectively. And so that's a really, really helpful technique for a lot of Sixes I know.
Yeah, putting words to thoughts helps me as well. It does force you to really think about and be a little bit more critical about, well, what am I thinking, and how do I want to phrase it? And then once you go through that, I can see how taking it outside would be a good way to work through something.
And I'm just thinking about all the types. Like, what are the ways that, as we're talking about this, doing this podcast here, so thinking about all of this and wanting to offer this as a gift to companies out there, teams out there. is recognizing that each type brings something so unique and so important. I just went through this with someone else where I was explaining how for each center, there's a gift, a contribution that type or that center, the three that are within that center, are giving out to the world around them. And if you, as as an organization, as a leader in the organization, want to actually bring out more, motivate, draw more out of people, then when you welcome their gift, as uncomfortable as it might be, it's not validating it like you're correct, your perspective's 100% right. It's just receptivity. Like, I'm open, I'm receiving what you have to say, I'm listening. It helps to motivate the type, because all of us actually do want to give something to the world around us. And we want to do something that impacts and serves other people. And so when that is received, and it's been received well, you want to give more. And so I think about, all of these types, and the 6 right now, as we're talking about this one, is whenever their thoughts or concerns are voiced, if there's room, as well as, of course, there are times where you have to say, could we do this later? Or, hey, bring your thoughts or your solutions, not just your questions, but bring some solutions, some possible solutions to the table. That's perfectly right to do sometimes. But it's the disposition of openness and receptivity, and then continuing to seek out 6s, particularly in this season, in this time now. Like, what do you think? What do you see? And doing those check-ins can be very motivating and very helpful to 6s.
Well, and how about a 7? You can speak with the most authority on that one.
The funny thing is, it's oftentimes easier for me to see other people and other types than my own. But I do see. Yeah, I do.
Makes sense to me. Yeah.
I usually struggle with explaining 7s. But so again, head type, head orientation, sort of thinking about the greatest contribution for head types is what comes out of our thoughts, followed by action. Here's something that I've been thinking about or perceiving. And I think when that is received well, that tends to give more motivation to 7s. There's one comment here that I totally resonated with. Well, a couple. One of them is everyone knew their role and plowed ahead. That's really very helpful for 7s, because sometimes we can get caught up in so many different interesting thoughts and ideas that knowing what is expected of us can help ground us. It's not always that it feels great, but it actually does settle us. And there's a slowing down of the anxiety that kind of lives within the 5, 6, and 7. And then also verbal processing does so much to relax and center, helps stop the spinning. So 7s experience some spin. Not all 7s would say it's a constant, but there is this sort of chasing. And sometimes when there's stress, it stops being a chasing of the next thing and it becomes a second guessing. And that's when we start to look a little bit like a 6, where there's a lot of second guessing, a lot of hesitation and doubt. So in this season right now, 7s may experience that as well. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know and then overthinking things and not getting into motion. Sometimes verbal processing with somebody who can listen well can be helpful to slow that down and stop that. And then a question, sometimes asking them, hey, what's happening next? What are you doing next? What's happening this week? What's the fun thing you're going to do? Or what's been fun for you lately? What have you been? Those are kind of great questions to ask. What's a question that helps a 7 feel, seen and feel welcomed or feel part of something? And that is sometimes asking that question. Like, if the how are you question to 5, 6s, and 7s is tricky. It's very tricky because head types will not go to the heart first. Most of the time, head types, it's head and then a quick, moving to action, or sometimes inaction, depending upon the stress level. To ask how you're doing feels like this is one of those how am I doing on the inside question. And it's really tough to answer. If it doesn't feel that way, if it's just like a general, how are you? most of the answer from a 7 will be fine. Yeah, cool. All good. Okay. Those are the typical answers. And so it's thought oriented and action oriented that can be more helpful to that type. Like, what are you doing next? What's happening for you this week? What's the fun thing you're doing? What have you been thinking about? Those questions are more accessible to head types in general, and certainly to 7s.
Yeah, that's a great way for us to continue the conversation on each of the core motivations is what do we do now that we're separated to make sure we still feel connected? And that's a very way of framing it. So, but before we
Excellent.
do that, let's talk to Jim a little bit about the body types and what it's, what's your view on a great team experience based on that core motivation?
Well, I loved one of the first comments we got, which was, I loved that my team saw each other and our strengths worked hard together, even in discord. And there is something about knowing that we're rubbing up against the right energy with the 8, that there's discord that can be happening, but sometimes the really good things are going to come out of that. They say that 8s experience conflict as intimacy, and I don't think it's so much that we experience conflict as intimacy, but people who go through a struggle together are closer. There is a bondedness that happens after that. And so a team that has a healthy amount of conflict to find where good ideas go, where breakthrough happens. And I love that this 8 was specifically saying that the team still saw each other. So there is still the valuing of the other, and trying to work through these things. And I think as an 8, I really resonated with this. People talked about taking on their roles with respect to other people's contributions. Once again, you're going to find contribution, that word, come up. You're going to find right action. You're going to find very active words like things that were accomplished. There is a bit of this I am what I do, which can have a high side and a low side, of course. There is that collaborative accomplishment. And they're a team that wants to always be checking in with each other, but doesn't just seriously get shit done sometimes. That's going to be a turnoff to an 8. And they're going to want that. Because, like we said, 8s are very action oriented. They're very do first centric people. So a lot of them might be going a little stir crazy right now because it's what do I do? I need to know what my right action step is. And for a lot of people who have an action base, being a little lost right now, there's a little bit of all of the rules have changed and I can't do a lot of the things that I do in order to be successful. I can't make the steps that I want to take. And it can be frustrating. And I think there can be, for a lot of the 8s, the withdrawal, the shutting down that happens. We heard that from the 3s as well. I think we heard that from a couple 7s as well. But a lot of those very action-oriented, there is a bit of a loss right now. And sometimes that can be so frustrating. They can either wreak havoc or they can end up withdrawing. And so I think it's super important for the 8s to understand to be in this moment and be present right now. And the pace is going to be different.
There was a question, though, that was answered here, Jim, that I wanted to know if you resonated with, because it sounds to me like this one is true for a ton of 8s that I've known, which is, do you really want to lead? The question to ask an 8 sometimes in order to care for them is, do you want to lead right now? Can I lead for you? What do you need me to do? And that speaks to the 8 feeling at times like it's always on them. It's incumbent on them to rise up and take the leadership or take the role of, the one who gets things moving. Is that true for you, Jim? Do you experience this, or is this seldom show up for you in the course of your life?
I think it definitely used to show up a lot more. I think less so now. It is important for me to ask that question, do you really need me to lead right now? Or to actually back off from it and just be I'm going to intentionally not lead right now because this isn't a time to really push. And when the default mode is push, it takes a lot of awareness and growth to say, I'm not going to push right now. My default setting is going to have to take a back seat to my intention, and my intention is to not push right now. But to ask, like, is there something you need me to do? Whenever possible, like, can you give me something to conquer so that I don't end up in a shutdown? I think that's a good question to be aware of. Like, what do you want me to do? Like, what do you need me to do? What do you want me to accomplish? I think is a core thing for any 8. If the answer is nothing for too long, you're going to see one that shuts down pretty often. Yeah, let's do a little bit on 9s. Even though they're both in the body center, we had a lot of like 8s and 9s and 1s on this particular webinar. They come from a very different motivation than the 8, because the 8 is so much the push. And I always say that, I'm an 8 married to a 9, and we are the proverbial unstoppable force in me and the immovable object in her. There's this there's this pairing that could happen there, because the 9s they do come from this desire to want things to be peaceful, to want there to be harmony, to people to get along. But I did like some of the interesting feedback I hadn't thought of before with the 9s who are saying, like, no micromanaging, because that feels very much against harmony. That sort of it almost feels nitpicky, and I could really see how that would push against a 9, even though so many times they want the interaction, they want feedback, they want clarity and direction, because they tend to be people who are really good hands-on, like putting their hands on something and putting their hands to work and their hands in right action as a body person. But just that micromanaging is just as upsetting to them as it is some of the other types, because it feels like a lack of harmony. And honestly, they have a good sense about what they're doing, and so they don't need that in the same way that some do. And so I think that's something to be sensitive, because they're going to be peaceful and they're probably not going to push against you if you are micromanaging, but you will see that withdrawal, and the stubbornness will eventually come out. But one thing that is so great about 9s in this time is they are so good at giving everyone space to bring their gifts, and that was a comment that came out. We often think of leadership as dominating leadership, as like a clear taking action, but 9s have this inclusive leadership, this receptive leadership in times like this, and in times in general. And they have a real capacity to include the voices of the others, not in just a how are we doing thing, which is important to them, but in a what should we do and how should we go about it. Often that gets devalued or unnoticed because there's not the push in the way that others do. But there's something about this current situation where we're having a lot more meetings over Zoom, and it's not like we're sitting in a room where there's a person at the head of the table and they're standing and everyone else is sort of sitting taking notes. Like, it's not a very boardroom feel. When you have these Zooms, you have this gallery, and so it feels a little bit more inclusive. And so I'm guessing there actually might be 9s emerging on teams in new ways right now, and I'd be very curious to hear. But yeah, that's my first sort of jump at 9s on that.
This might be tangential, but I would love for us to answer the question on a different podcast about what it means to micromanage, because I think that word is so used that I don't know anybody who would say, I love being micromanaged, or any manager that would say, I'm totally a micromanager. And I'm proud of it. Like, I don't know that anybody would say that. So I would love to explore that a little bit more, because I think it'd be hugely useful for managers to understand what that means. Like, oh, that's what it feels to micromanage. Oh, got you, to this particular type, as opposed to somebody else for whom that wouldn't feel that way, right? So, like, I think it's experiential. Like, oh boy, what a micromanager that individual was. Where that person might have said, I wasn't micromanaging, I was checking in. Or something else like that. It's just I'd love to do a separate podcast just exploring what that
I think that
means.
would
And
be
then
awesome.
that way,
Yeah.
yeah. And hopefully that would be helpful to managers to understand how to properly guide like a 9, where Jim said, that the sort of coming back and checking with a 9 and giving them some sense that they're doing the right thing is more frequent for a 9 than it might be for like an 8. So anyways, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a great conversation because it's both parties. It's the one who's managing and the one who's being managed. Each one of them would have a different lens, and the combination, I think, would create some either ease or friction.
Mm.
But I think that actually segues pretty well into the one, because ones who are aware of their tendencies and their gifts and their abilities, they've sort of they realize that their black and white thinking doesn't always serve the best, and they learn to work in grace and work in the grays of life, because the ones who aren't aware often can be micromanagers. I've experienced that with a couple of ones over the years, where there's just a it's not just a what to do, but it's a how to do every step, and there's sort of an overreaching in this is what I want this to look like, and this is how you need to do every single aspect of that. And there are a few types that actually might find some security in that, in the that very clear-cut expectation. But there can be a lot of people who don't, and I don't think it's so much a right or wrong. Am I being micromanaged? Am I not? But do I experience this kind of action as micromanaging? I'm sure that I experience something as an 8 as micromanaging that another person might just feel as good feedback, and I think there's a real range between people, and does it feel like micromanaging to them? And yeah, it is. I'm glad you brought that up, Joel, because it does need some nuancing, and I think it could even be nuanced a lot more by type, because there is a spectrum as far as what people would feel like they're being with that. But as far as ones, like the kind of feedback that we got on the webinar is this word respect came up for them, and that came up a lot for the body types. And I've noticed that recently, that coming up more, this idea of respect, and they, knowing either how to hear each other, or knowing how to assist each other, or knowing how to see what the other person's offering, or know how to interact with them. Like, that was resonating with all the body types, and the ones brought that up again. And I think there is something about the way that they approach life with a clarity, I want to know my right action, and I'm going to probably lead in that right action. There's the aspect of we are able to, find where our skills work best and we feel included. And because ones are very much about like doing the right thing, sometimes people think that they're like an island, that they just want to do the right thing, sort of separate from the rest. But they have a real desire for team and to feel included. Mm-hmm. And I love that came out in this webinar, that there's the desire to be included, even though there's this running commentary of like wanting things to be done like a very particular way or a right way, that there's a moral center of a right approach to these things.
Mm. Yeah. So in that podcast that we would do on micromanaging, I think we would probably maybe run down a list of certain words and what they mean, because respect is another one of those that, when I heard that from the type 1, I was thinking, that's interesting. What does that look like though to you? Because I'm 100% sure that I've disrespected you at some point in time, and you didn't know, or you felt disrespected by me, but I didn't know that I did. Like, because that same action isn't disrespectful to me when it's done to me. You know what I mean? So I think I'm curious about that for all types. Like, what does it look like for a 2, like you, Suzanne? Like, what does it look like for a 2 to feel disrespected? I'm sure it's very different than it is for an 8 or for a 7. So maybe it would just be helpful to kind of have a sense of, micromanaging, respecting. Like, what are the key things that really help people to feel overall pretty good at their workplace? And
Yeah.
I think that would be one of them, like a measure of autonomy, right? So it's the opposite of micromanaging, a measure of autonomy, respect,
Yeah, I think support is another word. And what does support look like to different types?
support. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. These words are all extremely important and they come out in the workplace all the time, but they carry various meanings, really different meanings for people based on their core motivation, based on their type. And so often this happens in the workplace. It's like, well, this is a core value. And then we're interpreting that value in different ways. So I think if a company knows, like, here's our core values, it'd be great to tell them, okay, the 6s on your team are going to understand that core value this way. The 2s on your team are going to understand this core value that way, because words are like buckets. They fill and they empty with meaning. And we fill so much of those meaning of those words based on our own perceptions and lenses of life. And if managers are trying to communicate a vision to their team and they don't get that, they don't understand how that's going to be heard by different people, or they're trying to put a definition around it which doesn't resonate naturally with those people, then there's going to be a loss there. There's going to be a loss of communication there.
Yeah.
And so I think leaning into some of those words is really helpful to understand, like, well, how is this person going to be able to think through that? Because Joel, like, you brought that up and I'm like, oh, right. Because through my lens, I look at that word completely differently than other people I know, other people I've worked with, other people I've led. It's just totally different. So this was not the end of the conversation we had. We kept going, but as we went, we realized we need to do this in a bit of a different way and give it a little bit more attention. So we are going to do another follow-up podcast about what each of these words mean, but we want to invite you into the conversation by joining us for a webinar on April 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can sign up for that on our website, www.theartofgrowth.org. You can also take our free beta enneagram test there as well. Contact us about coaching, set up a discovery call to see what might be right for you, or just share with us about something you have found helpful or something you'd like to hear us cover, because we love hearing about that as well. If you haven't left us a review yet on iTunes, please do so. It helps people find the show. Okay, that is all for now. Have an amazing week. And as we say, thank you for being a part of our work and for joining us in our work. But thank you especially for continuing to do yours, because as you do so, you will make the world a better place. Peace.